In this lesson, I want to give you some practical tools and tips you can take and use in your keyboard playing. It's going to apply specifically to piano, but you're going to find that a lot of the same stuff works with a lot of different sounds, whether you're playing pad or Rhodes or anything like that. And so what I want to talk about are chord forms and then similar inversions. And there are just a few, probably 2 or 3 really basic go-to things that are going to help you further along your piano playing that you can kind of fall back on for any song if you're kind of the lead instrument playing the piano. Now it's important to know from here on out in these lessons you're going to want to have a certain understanding of theory, and I can't recommend Jeffrey's class enough. He's doing a theory class based on the Nashville number system that is awesome. It's crucial, and can't recommend it enough. But so I'm gonna talk about and use numbers, and I'll try to remember to say, if I'm talking about a D, then I'll try to say the chord. But it's really helpful to know the numbers. And so what you're going to find is that similar inversions, all chords have inversions first off, which is you have the root inversion, then you have the first inversion and the second inversion, and all you're doing is taking I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but all you're doing is taking the A note, the bottom note, and transposing it an octave up. So this this D right here ends up this D up here. So, and then again, your second inversion, you take the first inversion, take the low note, and throw it up to the top note. And then you can do that all the way up and down the keyboard. Right, and what you're going to find is that different chords have very, very similar inversions, and there's no easier way to explain it than to look at the sus2 chord and the sus4 chord, because if you're looking in the key of D, which is what I've been playing, a D sus is this right here. It's D, G, and A, and but it's the exact same notes as a G2, just inverted. So if you take D sus and you go to the first inversion, it is a G2, and if you want to get particular, this is actually a D sus 4 and this is a D sus 2, and so it's they're all kind of similar, and hopefully you start to see the similarities. So if you're playing, say, just D to G, if you're playing it all in the root form and you move to G, my piano patch masks a lot of stuff here, but it's it's not going to be as cool as if you're able to know and instinctively switch different inversions that work together very similarly. Like, this is the first inversion, and then I'm going to go to the root of the G. If you want to get really fancy, you can go to the sus, and and a lot of the times there's most major chords, and I say most because this rule can totally be broken and can totally not work, but kind of a fallback, you can do you can do a major chord and do either a sus or 2, and you'll find it depends on the key and whether it's the 1 or the 4 or the 5 of that key. And there are patterns and there are things you can listen for to know which one. I'm not going to get into that. That's an ear thing. I can't really teach that, but the more you play, the more you'll understand it. So what you can do, back to our example, first inversion to G2, which sounds really nice, right? And all I'm doing is switching the one note. So really the only difference here is I move the root over, the bass note, and then I switch this one, the root of the first inversion, the F sharp, I move right up to G. So really simple. And that works really nicely. And it's a lot easier to play, frankly, when you're actually on a stage, and especially if you're learning songs quickly and you're having to kind of go from thing to thing. A lot of the times it's easiest to do something that's easy to get to. And this kind of concept, using inversions that work together, works really well for other sounds like a pad. You can easily do that, and then and that sounds really nice. But we're talking about piano, right? So anyway, it's important to know that because in all of these little tricks I'm going to give you, knowing what similar inversions are is going to help you a lot. So the first little go-to idea that I'm going to give you is the third heavy chord. It's the it can be played low down on the keyboard. It can be played higher, but it has a certain vibe when it's played in kind of this low mid range, and it's a chord and a kind of something you can use to walk around, and it really focuses around the third of a chord. Which what I mean by that is, if we're talking about the key of C here, we have C, E, and G, and so the E is the third of that chord, or the third. It's the third of the key too in this case. But so what we're going to do is build a chord around that E by just focusing on that, not playing anything else other than the bass note and that note. And then you can kind of walk around with it. It sounds awesome. Where if I weren't to use the inversions and use the third, that chord progression would sound like this. You know, not nearly as much vibe. And you can get that out of just about any chord progression, any key, you know, the normal, 6-4-1-5 progression. But you'll notice in every single thing, every example I give you, I'm going to probably end up breaking the rules once. And so in these two cases, when I get to that, right here, I'm actually just kind of using the root itself, and I'm still hitting the third. But in order to not jump all over the keyboard, I think it sounds nice to continue that walk up. And so you break all these rules to try to do what you think sounds the best. But as a go-to place to start, you want to have a good idea of what's going to sound awesome, which is that third. And again, same thing, the 6-4-1-5 progression. I'm breaking it a few times there, but it's the same concept. And with most of these little ideas I'm going to give you in these little tricks, the important thing to know is that it's when you're playing by ear, and whether you know it or not, that's what most of us are doing, even when you have a chord chart, it's not telling you exactly what to play. There's no sheet music, there's no, play this note now, although sometimes we have parts. For the most part, we're left to come up with these parts or learn these parts by ear, and a lot of the time, it's a good idea to have a good starting point, and that's how I operate. I oftentimes, when I first start playing a song, don't really know what I want to do until I start trying a few of these ideas and go, okay, that's a cool vibe. Rather than starting and going, what should I play, and just knowing. These are tricks that you can kind of start and build something from. The second thing I want to show you is kind of what I already touched on, which is using chords with similar inversions. And you can do that with pretty much any chord progression because you can invert any chord across the keyboard. So, for example, again, the 6-5-1-4 progression, we could just start with just a really simple or there's a couple options with it. You can again play around with it, the sus2 and the sus4 I was talking about. So but you'll notice my hand doesn't change much across the keyboard. As a general rule of thumb, I try really hard not to be all over the keyboard the whole time. I try really hard to keep in the same range as we're playing through stuff because it really ends up having a unified sound and ends to kind of the emotional feel of the song. It really lends to it really well. In this similar chord thing, you can kind of do really you can do rhythms with, which we'll do in a minute. But like so, and that's, I'm just, I'm for the 6, then the 1. or the 6, the 4, then the 1, and the 5. That all comes from knowing the inversions, and if you're wondering, this chord is a major 7, but I just add in that 2 instead. Drop down the third to the 2. And then finally, the next little trick I want to show you is it's kind of like a walking chord, and it's similar to kind of a hammer-on a guitar, which, yeah, anyway, it's similar to a hammer-on the guitar, and it's really appropriate when you're doing like, you know, sus notes and sus chords and stuff like that. So if you're doing, you know, same example, D, this is D sus, we can kind of walk that sus down to the 3rd. Right? And that sounds really nice. And then you can also do that the other direction with the 2, although a lot of the times that sounds better when it's inverted. When you do that with the 2, it kind of sounds jazzy, right? Which isn't necessarily what we like to go for. But what if you invert that up, instead of you take this inversion of it, you can then kind of you know, and it's just little things that work. And I look for that anytime that there's a sus note, a sus chord that's appropriate. I know that I can at least use that as a walking note, or I could probably hang on it. And one of the examples I want to give you for this is the same example I used last time, which is God, I Look to You. That's the sus that I was talking about. And then you walk it down a half step, and you're back to the root. So that's a little walk-up thing, right? And you'll notice I hardly move around the keyboard much at all. And this would bring us to the final one, which is using these little walk-around notes and these little passing notes to follow the melody, which if you know that song, that follows the melody really well. You know, it's pretty much identical to what the melody is, which is really nice and creates a nice base for the singer to really sing from, a place to start at, and kind of lends well to the song. And following melody works really well with, you know, other kind of chord forms and other kind of, you know, starts, not just the little walking chords I was talking about or the sus chords, which is, you know, the chorus of that same song, God, I Look to You, is a really good example of, where it goes something like this. Or the way I play it, or something like this. Which, you know, if you know that song, follows the melody pretty closely. So yeah, that would be the final little trick I have for you, is to find chord forms that follow the melody, which inevitably means you need to develop your ear, which again brings me back to highly recommending Jeffrey's theory class and Nashville number deal, because it really helps you develop that ear and get a kind of a base for where you're going to go. So to wrap up, go ahead and take these ideas and kind of practice them. And, you know, the more time you spend on them, the more it's gonna, you know, the more it's gonna help you. And so, remember, as a reminder, it's the 3rd heavy chords, right? And then you have the similar notes, which also, right? And then you have the walking chords, as I'm calling them, or the walk around kind of, that's focused on the sus, which was God, I Look to You. And then you have following the melody in the in other kinds of chords where you're not walking, and it's not sus, but still practicing following that melody of songs. So yeah, take some time, learn these tricks, and it'll do you real good. They work across the board with pad or Rhodes or anything, and yeah, should be helpful.